Okay. Welcome to Litsoc. It's Thursday. Hi everybody. Hi people at home. I'm not sure if they can see me, but anyway, I'll move over here. Today we have a really special guest, Mr. Malcolm Duffy. He's been here before, and he's going to talk to us about his previous books and also about his next book to come, and one that's been published since we last saw him. So welcome, Malcolm.
Thank you.
Before we start, I just want to say a couple of things. Well done to everybody who was in the musical. Hands up if you're in the musical. Well done. Big clap. Fabulous. Woo! Thank you for a fabulous show. And you can catch up with Oliver Twist if you weren't here because you were at rehearsals. Slightly embarrassing moment for year 13 last week, where they only just realised that Oliver is actually taken from a book called Oliver Twist.
No, year 13.
However, they know, sorry, not year 13, year 12. Now, not you, Hannah, not you, or you, Josie. So, anyway, that was corrected by the English department and also by Litsoc. So thank you, came to Oliver Twist. The other thing I want to mark also is the last week it was announced, Marianne told me in lessons, that Dame A.S. Byatt had died. Now, it's not a name that will probably be familiar to anybody apart from Marianne, who discovered the news.
Did I tell you?
But she was an amazing writer of the stature of Hilary Mantel. Not quite as well known now as Hilary Mantel because she didn't have a massive TV show. She's just had a few films made and radio plays. But she wrote the most fabulous, one of the best books I've ever read, called Possession. And the extraordinary thing about it is it's a story, two stories in one, a search, an academic search, but also a detective novel, a novel about family, about secrets, about love. It has the most hilarious description of a hurricane in the Sussex Downs I've ever read. It's really funny. It's got a fabulous audio book by Samuel West, and also it is filled with poems because one of the main characters is a Victorian poet, and she made up all the poetry. Which is just amazing, and it's poetry not about love or anything sort of, even Shakespeare's love poems. It's about sort of the natural world and the discoveries that were going on in the Victorian era, including also spiritualism medium, going to see a medium comes into it as well. Amazing. So it's a big loss, and I heartily recommend her fiction. And also she's written about non-fiction. She's very interesting because she also has a sister who was a very, very best-selling novelist in the 1960s, Dame Margaret Drabble. And also she was in Venice and she saw a ghost. But funnily enough, not an Italian ghost, an English ghost of an English creative. And that led to a novel. So she was an extraordinary woman. Also, she was very interested in Freud's essay to do with the uncanny, which we used to study when we were doing Gothic, and she did a very interesting radio program about it as well. So, very erudite woman. So it's very sad that she died at the age of 86. So, without more ado, I hand on to our erudite speaker of today, possibly knight in waiting, Malcolm Duffy. Lovely to see you, Malcolm.
Yeah, thank you very much. And it's great to be back in Surbiton again. I think it's my third visit here. My eldest daughter went to Surbiton. She left here a couple of years ago, and she's now at Nottingham studying property. So she's doing well. So I've got a lot of connections. A lot of my friends still have daughters here. So I like to come back here as and when I can. But I'm here today to talk about books and the books that I've written. But before I get onto them, I thought it might be of interest to you to know how I ended up becoming an author. Because I was one of those kids who always really loved writing, and I guess everyone in this room, it's great to be in a room full of book lovers, but I don't know how many of you like writing. Anyone? Hands up, anyone who likes writing? Well, pretty much. Yeah, that's good. I mean, I've always really enjoyed writing, even when I was a little boy growing up in Newcastle. If it was a wet day, I'd quite often just grab a pen and paper and just write stories to amuse myself. Because this was before mobile phones, we had to try and find other ways to keep ourselves entertained. And one way I did it was by writing little stories. I just did it for my own entertainment. I didn't send them in or anything. And I think writing or coming up with ideas has been something that's been part of my DNA. It's something that I just love doing. And my family moved down south. I went to school in St Albans. I didn't know what, like a lot of people, I didn't know what I wanted to do for a career. And I ended up studying law at university, at Warwick University, and I always thought, well, law is a good degree for anyone who wants to go down that path. And I thoroughly enjoyed law, but I thought it's not for me. I didn't want to carry on and do my part twos and become a solicitor or a barrister. I thought I want to do something writing, but I had no idea what. I didn't know, how to end up being a journalist. And I met this girl, and she said, I'm doing a copywriting course. And I said, I'd only heard the word copyright in connection with law, when you copyright a product or a brand. And I said, copywriting, what's all that about? And said, copywriting is people who write ads, and that's a profession. I'd never really thought about it. And at the time, there was only one course in Watford for people learning to become advertising writers. And I thought, this is right at my street. So the course was unfortunately full at the time, but they got me to do a copy test, and it was quite interesting. They had things like think of 10 uses for a pencil other than writing. In fact, when I've done a few creative writing sessions, and that's one of the questions I put in. It's quite a weird one, but what it does is it gets your brain to think in different directions. There was another quite interesting one. They said, imagine a spaceship has landed, and they gave you some details. It's landed in Yorkshire, or someone's reported a spaceship. Write the first 200 words, one as it would appear in the Sun newspaper, and one in the Guardian. And I thought that was really good, because I probably know the Sun and the Guardian. They were very different, probably polar opposites. But it was all about mental gymnastics, and I loved doing the copy test. It was right up my street. And they said, it's a really good copy test. But unfortunately, the course is full. So I said, well, how can I get a job? And they said, well, put a portfolio together. So that involved making up ads for products. They didn't have to be, I didn't obviously have the full brief, but I remember doing one for the army and for paints and various things. And I just sort of made up ads. And then I knocked on some doors of advertising agencies. The work was pretty rubbish to begin with, and a lot of people threw me out the door and said, this is absolute rubbish. Don't come back. But a few people spent their time and said, look, I think there might be some promise here. You really need to go back, and you need to craft and craft. So that's what I did, and I finally got a job in an agency, and ended up being there for 4 years. And I've been doing advertising, copywriting ever since. And for me, it's been a perfect career, because what I love about it is you get thrown lots and lots of problems for lots of different products. So you might I've worked on the Sainsbury's account, so they may say sales of Kellogg's cornflakes or something are doing badly in Sainsbury's. Can you do us an ad? And that could be a poster, it could be a TV commercial, it could be anything. But at the other extreme, a lot of people think advertising is just products and brands, the sort of things you might see on TV. But quite often it's opinion changing. That's how I like to think. You're changing someone's opinion for wanting one thing to go somewhere else. And going back a few years, I worked on the campaign to ban landmines for the International Red Cross, which is quite an amazing high-end thing. This is going back into the 90s when, for those of you who may have watched The Crown Princess Diana, she was heavily involved in the campaign to ban landmines, and was leading to the Ottawa Treaty in 1997. And the big problem with landmines, so I don't want this to be a landmine discussion, it is still a huge problem in the world, but it's even more so then. Because these are weapons that are just left in countries, and they tend to blow up innocent civilians and who often lose limbs. So we came up with a big campaign. It was a global campaign, and we travelled the world. We actually filmed in Angola, where there was a civil war going on at the time, which was quite scary. We had armed guards with us. We were filming in an area called Wambo, which was obviously once a beautiful Portuguese town, which was absolutely decimated. Every building was covered in bullet holes, and it was a very dangerous place. And the campaign was successful, and I can't, claim all the credit for it. I'm sure Princess Diana did a bit as well. But the Ottawa Treaty, it went from, I think they had 40 signatories, it went up to 150. So the Ottawa Treaty was passed, and landmines were banned as a weapon of war. It's a shame that they are still, to this day, being used, and Ukraine, which we'll come on to in a bit. But I loved advertising, not just because of things like that, but just the variety that it gave me. And I've worked for a lot of big agencies, and I had my own advertising agency for 10 years. But going on to about 2010, we sold our advertising agency to a Canadian company, and I thought, I want to do something else now. I've been doing advertising for a long, long time, and I want to do something else. A sort of career move, and I always like a challenge. And I ended up being headhunted by Comic Relief, who I'm sure you all know of. At the time, it was Comic Relief and Sport Relief. And Richard Curtis, who some of you may know, he was my boss, and I could still never get used to the idea of walking into a room and having Richard Curtis, who was behind Mr. Bean and lots of famous films. But that was a great experience, and in fact, it sort of led on to the first book. And I was there for just over 3 years, and I loved the experience, and I still do a lot of work for various charities. For charities always track me down somehow. They seem to know I'm out there. I'm doing work for Combat Stress at the moment, which is a military charity for people suffering from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, because a lot of military people, even from wars a long time ago in Iraq and Afghanistan, are still suffering very badly. So I'm still doing some work for that. But how did I end up getting to write books? Well, I guess while I love advertising, I love writing, and I love copywriting, I was always, I guess, singing to someone else's tune. That I always had to work to whatever Sainsbury's wanted, or the International Red Cross, or Volvo, whichever client I was working to. You get given a quite strict brief and said, you've got to write 300 words on this, or you've got to write a 30-second radio commercial, and it's quite limiting. And I thought, I want to write my own thing. So I don't want someone standing over my shoulder. I want to write something for myself. Which leads me on to this book, Me Man, Me Dad, Me. And you probably think, well, how do you come up with an idea for a book? And funnily enough, I was writing some notes the other day, and I think for me as a writer, it's not wanting to write a book. I almost think it's almost a need to write a book, and I think that word need is really important. And I think anybody who wants to write or has got any passion to write, you almost feel you have to do it. And I felt that with this book, that even if no one was going to read it, I thought I had to get it down on the page. I just somehow, something within me said I have to do it. And I'm sure that's true of other writers. And I think that difference between wanting to do it and needing to do it, I think is really quite key. And to give you a bit of a backstory to how I came to write this, Comic Relief, as you probably know, the money that they raise on Red Nose Day, they send it out to lots and lots of different charities, both in the UK and abroad. All sorts of charities, mental health charities. But one of the charities I got sent to see where the money was spent was down in Bath. And I'll never forget, it was a beautiful day. I'm sure some of you have been down to Bath, fabulous city. But the reason we were going there wasn't quite so nice. It was a domestic violence charity. And we met women who'd suffered domestic abuse at the hands of their partners. And they told us some, pretty amazing and quite horrible things. But they were very strong and resilient and quite outspoken. And we asked questions like, why do you stay with someone who's being abusive to you? And the answers were many and varied, and some of them made it into the book. And a lot of people said, I can't afford to leave. There were people from poor backgrounds. They had no outlet. Perhaps their partner was maybe the only money earner. Maybe they had young children. And they were very much trapped. And other people said, I love him. I love my partner, despite it all, and I know what he does is wrong, but something about me can't make him leave. And it's quite a complex, difficult area. And then in the afternoon, we met the children of these women, because because the charity helped the children, because obviously the children are quite heavily affected by what's going on in the households. And a lot of the kids were normal, boys and girls, similar age to yourself, and, were chatting away. But I'll never forget there was one boy, and he could barely speak about what happened. He was all internalising it all. And I thought, there sounds like there could be a story there. Because I thought, rather than look at the story from perhaps the obvious way of looking at it from the woman's viewpoint as to what's happened to her, why not tell the story from the viewpoint of the boy? So on the train back to London, this idea was germinating in my head. And I thought, this boy doesn't quite know what's going on. He ends up being a 14-year-old boy in Newcastle. These terrible things are going on to his mum. And I thought, I could write a book about that, but really it's not going anywhere. It's going to be quite dreary to have 200 or 300 pages of a boy in his house and his mum and bad things happening to her. I thought he's got to do something. The main characters in stories, as I'm sure you know, all have to act. They have to do something. They have to be the dominant player. They have to move. And I thought something needs to happen. And then I just let the ideas germinate for a few days or weeks. And then I thought, what if he's got a dad, somewhere who he's never met before? And in his, young, naive way, he thinks his dad can sort out this other person and can sort out all his problems. And in a sort of flash of inspiration, I think I sort of had the idea there. My mum, my dad, and me. And in the middle part of the book, because Danny, this boy, goes in search of his dad. I don't know, have any of you read the book at all? So I won't give any spoilers too much, but I think when I'm writing a book, I think you've got to give your characters lots of problems. And funnily enough, I've done it I've written one short film, and I'd love to write longer length films. I think a lot of the rules, so to speak, of filmmaking and book writing are very, very similar. You've got to condense your story into a certain length of time or pages. But also you've got to have a character who faces a big problem. If you watch any film, in fact, they nearly always follow actually the same route that a book does. You set out the problem, usually in the first 30 minutes of a film, and same with a book. That might be the first, however many, 60, 70 pages. The big part of a film or a book is resolving those problems. How does the character come to terms with it? And then you have the denouement, which is the last, probably quarter, maybe even shorter than that, depending on the book or the film. And pretty much, if you probably don't realise that as you're watching a film, but basically you've buried a Marvel film or something a bit more highbrow, that all films and all books tend to follow that format. And I think there's a good reason for it, because it's classic storytelling. You're setting up somebody with a problem, you're setting all the problems that they've got to face, and how do they come to terms with those problems, and then you've got the resolution. So obviously in this story, Danny has a lot of problems. He's only 14 years old. He knows his mum is being abused. He's got a dad he's never met before. He's heard that his dad could be a bit of a bad character. He doesn't even know where his dad lives. So there's problems upon problems upon problems. And I love it when I'm writing books to try and think, how many problems can I give a character without getting crazy or getting unbelievable? But I think that is a sort of format that I think works for me. I mean, other writers may come at it from a slightly different way, but I think that classic way of setting out what is the fundamental problem that you've got in this story that's going to grab people's attention, create layer upon layer upon layer and layer of problems, and then resolve it in a way. And I think this story, again, I won't give the ending away, but I think for me it has the right feel to an ending, because I don't always like Hollywood endings. Some of you may watch Hollywood films, and sometimes they just feel a bit unbelievable, especially if they're from Disney, perhaps, not wanting to diss Disney. But, they're very good films, but they can quite often seem a bit unbelievable. And I try and have, like my stories, to have a little bit of an uplift, but to have a believable element in it. So I wrote this book, and then I thought, what am I going to do with it? I didn't know anyone in publishing, and I thought I could self-publish, and a lot of people do. The problem if you self-publish, and there are lots of companies, probably for maybe, you might have to find £500,000, and you could probably get 50 copies printed off, which you might give to your friends or whatever, and there's nothing wrong in doing that. But I wanted to reach a bigger audience, and the only way to do that is to find a literary agent, and that's the way you can get your book into hands. Because the way the sort of publishing world works, you've got all the big publishers, all the big publishing houses, Penguin and what have you, but they won't accept anything. If one of you try to book, they'd say, no, you have to come through an agent. And that is the sifting process. They will have their agents who they'll trust as the gatekeepers for good books. So I thought I need to find myself an agent. Easier said than done. I read somewhere that the average agent gets something like over 1,000 submissions in a year, out of which they might pick 2. So you've got 1 in 500 chance. And what you have to do is you have to send your synopsis and then the first usually 50 pages. And I'm sure what a lot of editors do, they'll probably think they won't read the first 50 pages unless they like the synopsis. So they probably don't have to read that much, but they will look at the synopsis. That's why I spent so long on the synopsis. And when I do write synopsis of books, and I still do them, and I think it's a good discipline, you have to spend so much time getting that to be as good and as powerful and as tight, as you possibly can. Those who are into writing, rewriting is writing. So I wrote a synopsis as well as I possibly could, and the first 50 pages I was fairly happy with, and I sent it off to a few agents, and a few came back and said, "Oh, I like this, but I've got other authors in a similar vein at the moment." Or because I think normally what literary agents do, they might have a pool of, let's suppose they've got 40 writers. They might say, "Oh, I want 3 in the half a dozen in the dramatic area, and I want some in this section, some in this section." But finally, I sent it off to an agent called Duffy Andrew Lynch, who said she was looking for new writers, especially in YA. So I sent it off to her, and then she got back pretty much straight away and said, "Oh, can we meet up?" And said, "Oh, I love it. Can I read the rest of the story?" She liked it. She said quite a few changes. Few changes need to be made. So I probably went through about 3 or 4 more drafts, then sent it off. And she said, "I've got a publisher in mind I think will be perfect for this," which is Head of Use. She sent it off to Fiona Kennedy there, and she got straight back and said she loved it, and and they said they were going to publish it. But the work wasn't finished there, because while they'd bought it, and then Fiona Kennedy said, "Oh, I love the book, I love the premise, I love the writing. I think we need to change it a bit." And she said, because I actually love writing comedy, although my books have got quite a serious feel to them. Comedy is just like a big thing for me. And she said, "Oh, I think you need more humour in it." That's quite a big change when you've written a book. And I thought, well, there are elements of humour. And I thought, I need to write another character. And she said, "Oh, why can't Danny have a girlfriend?" And I said, "Well, you could, but that's quite a big change. You can't just drop a girlfriend in on page 24 and she doesn't appear again until page 326. So I sort of took a deep breath and thought, let's go away and see if I can work it in with a girlfriend. And it was totally the right thing to do. And for anyone who gets to read the book, Danny has a girlfriend called Amy, and she actually plays really not a huge role, but a very important role, because she's like the voice of reason to his voice of stupidity at times, because he does some pretty stupid things. And it did add some humour as well. So sometimes when you hear suggestions like that, and when you've written already 300 pages, you think, "Oh my goodness, I'm going to have to start again." But it was totally the right thing to do. And I guess because she is a publisher of young adult books, that's what she does for a living. She's got far more experience than I have. So I don't always agree with everything that they say, but when they say something, I do listen, and I do push back every now and again. And sometimes I'll think, "No, I don't. I don't agree with that," or whatever. So I reckon I probably wrote about 18 drafts of this book, which is quite a lot. Obviously, the drafts at the end were getting smaller and smaller, but the first few drafts were quite big changes. Pleased to say the latest books, the drafts are getting fewer and fewer, so I guess I know what I'm doing now. But yeah, and then the book...
Can I ask a question? Do you think she was thinking about the potential audience?
Yeah, absolutely,
and
yeah.
potentially, possibly film or
Yeah.
series?
I don't think she was thinking about film,
No.
but she was definitely thinking about the audience, and that a subject matter like domestic abuse can seem like, oh my God, I'm not sure I want to even read about that. And she obviously saw that, like I can and I do like writing comedy, that she wanted to see a bit more of it where relevant. Obviously, you have to be very careful in anything as serious as this, that you're... and when I was writing the book, I was thinking in a funny sort of way about the women and the people and people who have suffered domestic abuse have read the book as well. And I'd hate someone to go, oh, you're demeaning it or belittling it or choosing the wrong tone of voice. And I always think I owe a duty to the people, because these books are fictional, but they're based on fact. And that I think I owe it to them to try and do something that is not going to annoy them or that is going to feel right. Funny enough, it's quite a very heavy program, which you may not have watched, about the Yorkshire Ripper, which was on TV recently, and it was all from the victim's viewpoint, and I thought it was brilliantly handled, because it could have been a shock horror, horrible piece of work, but actually it was very carefully handled, and rather than focusing on this dreadful man who did these terrible things, it focused on the lives of the women who suffered, and I thought it was very well handled. And I think as a writer, I always think very carefully about that, is not just the audience of young adults, but also adults who will read it as well, some of whom will have been through this, and try and do as good a job as I can and thinking about them. So this book came out in 2018, a few years ago now, and went down incredibly well. Won quite a few awards. It was shortlisted for Waterstone's Book of the Year. And I've been around a lot of schools, in fact, all over the country. In fact, it's funny when I go to Newcastle, where I'm from, and because the book's written in a slight Geordie accent, you get kids there saying, Mum, I didn't know they wrote books the way I talk," which is quite funny. But yeah, the book seems to have gone down well all over the country, and I still talk about it, and I still like it. And it was optioned for a TV series. Unfortunately, COVID hit. There was a company up in Liverpool paid the option to turn it into a TV series. Unfortunately, that option's fallen by the wayside. But I met with my agent the other day, and we both thought, and I think it really would make a great play. So I wouldn't call myself a playwright, although I have been on playwriting courses and I do know a bit about it. So I've written the first draft of the play of Me Man, Me Dad, Me. Obviously, you have got to get 250 pages down to 94 pages of it, so that was quite a challenge. So, I mean, hopefully one day that will happen, but who knows? But again, that was a really nice exercise to try and do, is to take something and give it in a completely different format and try and condense it, yet still have the strength of the story coming through. So, yeah, I had a book up and running, and my publisher really liked it, and they said, "Oh, well, can we do in fact, I think it was a 2 or 3 book deal." They said, can we have more books? And I never really set out particularly to be a YA writer, but they said, "Oh, we like your style. When in the school visits, everyone seems to like it." So they said, "Oh, can we have another book, please?" Now what? And I suppose I've sort of ended up in the area of issues, and I suppose it goes back to a bit my advertising background. I've worked on a lot of charities over time, not only Comic Relief. I've worked, in fact, this one was born out of the fact that I've worked on shelter for homeless people, and I wanted to write another issue story. And I thought, what about homelessness? Because we all see homeless people out in the streets, and I thought it would be a really interesting thing to write a story about that. And before I wrote the story, I decided to not do what I normally do. I went out and did my research and spoke to a lot of homeless people. In fact, there's a great charity in Kingston, Kingston Church's Action on Homelessness, and I spent a lot of time with them, met a lot of homeless people, and their stories were incredible, they really were, and again, a lot of them made it into the book. Because I said to some people, I said, "Well, why do you sleep on the street? Is it not safe to go in a hostel? Can you not go somewhere?" And some of them said, "The hostels are too dangerous. There are people in there who probably shouldn't be in there. They'll either have mental health problems or whatever." And a lot of them said, "I feel safer sleeping in a tent than I do in a hostel. I can't speak for all hostels, but I was just speaking, from this one person. And there was another guy, he worked in the city, and he said, I had a really good job. And he said, in the space of about 3 weeks, I was sleeping on buses. And he said, a lot of people, they can fall through the net very, very quickly. And this happened to this one particular guy. And I felt really sorry for him because he obviously had he's paying his rent, and he's probably probably had just enough money to get by each month. And he didn't have any support because I forget which country he was from. And he lost his job, and he couldn't pay his rent. And he went from that, literally within a couple of days, to sleeping on buses because he had nowhere to go. And again, I spoke to a lot of charities like Shelter who do absolutely amazing work in helping these people, or helping to find hostels for those who support them. But again, I didn't want to write a classic sort of doom-laden story. And I wanted to write a story about, again, all these stories have been about young boys, but my most recent one, which I'll come on to, it does feature a young woman, about a boy who lives sort of in this area, and I think he doesn't realise how good he's got it, and his family move up to Yorkshire, and he really doesn't like his house, and he doesn't really like there, and he meets someone by accident, living in some woods nearby, who a girl from Newcastle who's homeless, and set it up in Ilkley in Yorkshire. I don't know if anyone's been there, but it's the most beautiful town. It's absolutely fabulous, and swimming plays a part in the story as well. And I wanted someone with a Lido, an outdoor swimming pool, because this boy Tyler, he's a very keen swimmer. So I sort of Googled places that had Lidos, and I came across Ilkley, and I thought this place is perfect because, again, homelessness can happen anywhere. The obvious thing would be to set it in central London, where you see people in Soho who are down on their luck or whatever. So I thought I'll set it in a beautiful village, the last sort of place where you'll expect to find homeless people, but you can find homeless people anywhere. And really, for this boy Tyler, it's a story of discovery. When he doesn't realise how good he's got it, and this girl Tyler, and this girl Spider, who's down on her luck, and he really sees into her world. And I think there's a real feeling of empathy, and both of this book was picked for the Empathy Lab. I don't know if you've heard of Empathy Lab at all, but they really try and promote books and the feeling of empathy, and trying to think about other people before yourself, and walk in the shoes of other people. So I was very aware with this book, again, having met a lot of homeless people, to tell their story as well and as properly as I could. But also to show, I guess, the naivety of people who don't know what that world means. Because I think a lot of homeless people are looked down upon. A lot of people say, oh, they're lazy, or why don't they just get a job, or that they're beggars, or that they're and some people are, but all of the homeless people I met had amazing stories, and none of them were beggars, to be honest, and in fact a lot of homeless people said, I've got too much pride to ever beg, I would work in a shop or do whatever. So it's like a lot of these issue stories, they're quite complicated, and you sort of tread a very fine line. But I was always thinking, I must tell that story truthfully and properly, and I made sure that the homeless people I'd worked with, that they all got copies of the book, and thankfully their feedback was really good, and that was really important to me, that I'd told the story truthfully and with compassion, because I think you have to have compassion in these stories. Not that everyone in these books are particularly nice, because there will always be bad people in the world, but I think I like to tell the stories that have characters that have got some compassion and some empathy for what they're discovering. So that was Sofa Surfer. That came out 2021. Unfortunately, it came out almost just as COVID started. So all my school visits, all my book visits. So it fell by the wayside a little bit, but I'm still, really proud of the book, and it again has been critically acclaimed. So then on to book number 3, issue number 3. They said, great, can we have another book? And I thought, well, there are so many issues in the world, and homelessness is a big one. And again, it got me thinking, what do I know about? and I hit upon the subject of dyslexia, because my daughter Tallulah, I mentioned, she's dyslexic. In fact, we didn't realise until, in fact, I think it wasn't until she came to Surbiton she got diagnosed. And there's probably people who are dyslexic in this room. You know, they say as many as 1 in 5 people are dyslexic, and it comes in all shapes and sizes. There's some people who are severely dyslexic, who really struggle to read and write, and those who might be mildly dyslexic. Tallulah was down the mild end. A family friend of ours, who was a dyslexia expert, who helped us write this book, helped me tell the story. She really helped. And one little thing she helped was to touch type, because I think a lot of people when they write, there's that disconnect between the brain and what's going down the paper. But funnily enough, typing really helped her. But she is still mildly dyslexic, but it hasn't stopped her going to university and doing really well. So it should never hold you back. And another reason I wrote this book was I got asked a few years ago to write a short film by the 2 guys in North London, 2 gay guys who were incredibly wealthy, and they wanted to do a charity film. And one of the guys was dyslexic, and he said, can we do like an ad? And I said, well, you can do an ad. And the more we delved into it, they'd done a bit of research, and they'd been down to Bristol to meet this couple who had set up a dyslexia school. And there was this most amazing story about how this woman, Pat Jones, and her son Mike, and this was going back to the 70s, and he'd really struggled at school. He couldn't write, and blah, 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 and he got bullied, and he got into fights, and he got into all sorts of trouble. And his mum, she even flew to America, where they were a bit ahead of the curve on dyslexia, found out all about it, invented her own sort of games and teaching tools, which is now Nessie, which you may have heard of, which is the biggest online dyslexia tool in the world. And I thought that's the most amazing story. So we turned that into a film. And if ever you get a chance, it's on YouTube. So 1.7 million views, so a lot of people have seen it. And it's called Michael, M-I-C-A-L. And if you get a chance, have a look at it. But it's a really heartwarming story to tell, and I'm glad that I got to tell it, because although it's not the real people or actors playing the parts of these characters, it shows the length this mother went to help her son, and he has gone on to amazing things. And obviously they were involved in the filming as well. They were there on the shoot. But I learned a lot about dyslexia from that film and that process, and I guess from my daughter. And I thought, why don't I write a book about it? And then I thought, it's quite a hard thing to write a book about, because I guess you've got homelessness, it's very visceral, you've got people on the street, you've got the cold, you've got the potential violence, and I guess domestic violence. Dyslexia is all going on in someone's head, and I think for someone who's not dyslexic, I think it's really hard to even imagine what it must be like. I suppose in a way almost like mental health issues. If someone's got a mental health issue, you think it's very hard for someone who hasn't got that to think, what on earth is that like? And I think dyslexia must be like that for those who've got it in a very mild way or a very extreme way. So I started playing around with some ideas, and I just came upon me, thought, why not have 2 boys who end up living in the same house together? They're sort of thrown together by their different parents coming together and living in the same house. And these boys have got nothing in common. They come from different parts of the country. One's, dare I say, a bit of a nerd. He's a bit of a bookworm. The other one is has been in jail. He's been in Feltham Young Offenders. They've got nothing in common, these 2 boys, but they find out that they're both dyslexic, that they ultimately do have something in common. And I wanted to really up the stakes, that there has to be something in the story that's going to be really pressurizing for one of the boys. And I don't think I'm giving too much away, is that the parents of the boys decide to get married, and the mum asks one of the boys, will he read at the wedding? And obviously reading at a wedding, no big deal, unless you're dyslexic. And the boy who's dyslexic, that's probably the worst thing you could ever imagine, is to have to stand up in front of 200-300 people and read when he knows that he can't read. He's useless at reading. He's not that he's not bright. And that's when the other boy comes in to help him. So again, it's about creating a big problem, a big family drama, and I guess trying to bring dyslexia to life. And for those who aren't dyslexic, or I'm sure you will know people who are dyslexic, trying to make that entertaining. I know at times it's odd to try and talk about entertainment with some of these quite difficult issues, but I feel it's my duty as a writer to entertain and to try and make things that can seem a bit boring or difficult, interesting. And I guess that's what I've been doing in advertising for years, as to how do you make a box of Kellogg's cornflakes, which is just, a bit of cereal in a box. How do you make that interesting, make people want to spend, £2.50 on a big box of cereal? And I guess that's the same with a book in a way. You're trying to take subjects or subject matters and make it interesting and make it a page turn and make people like the characters and make people want to know what's going to happen. So that's the third book. And I haven't got my fourth book, but I can tell you a bit about it because it's coming out very soon.
What's the new book called? The last book?
This was Read Between the Lies.
Read Between the Lies.
Read Between the Lies, yeah. So book number 4, I think it's going to be out in February. And that's about a subject that is very much of the here and now, and it's about the Ukrainian war, and it's about refugees. Because we had a family of Ukrainian refugees living with us for over a year. When the war started, we thought we wanted to do something, and we had enough room in our house, so we joined the Homes for Ukraine scheme. And my wife Jan, she put something on Facebook, and next thing you know, someone rang up, and this young girl called Sophia, who was 18 at the time, and she said they were living in Spain. They'd left Ukraine, gone to Poland, gone to Germany, gone to France, gone to Spain, and they were looking to come to the UK because she spoke very good English, and they had a few contacts in the UK. So we said, yeah, why don't you come? Which was quite a bizarre thing to do because we'd never met them before. And the 3 generations of the same family. There's Sophia, who was 18, there's her mum, and her grandma. So we had 3 generations living with us. And the mum and the grandma could barely speak any English, and Sophia spoke perfect English. Yeah, so they lived with us for over a year. And what I learned from them has really gone into the new book, their resilience and their courage and their sadness and their hope. And Sophia read the book. She read an early draft of it and gave me some great advice and things that should and shouldn't go into it. The book isn't their story, but it's based on their story. It's about a family. Funny enough, I'm in Kingston. They say, write about what you know. I thought I could set it. I just thought, why make life hard for myself? I'm just going to set it in Kingston. I know Kingston. I know where the shops are. I know the buses. Yeah. So anyway, it's about a family living in Kingston, and they have a mum and a daughter and her son who move in with the family, and it's about the problems that come with them. Because I guess the line in the books is, escaping a war doesn't mean the end of your problems. Just because you move into a different country, there's a different set of problems. And I don't want to spoil it, but something major happens within the story to create that drama. But I don't think I've ever spent a book and spent so long looking at the news and going through the facts. And there's a timeline at the back of the book about the war, and even that took an incredibly long time to pick which moments in each month do you pick on to show what is the timeline, because the war is still going on. It's a really sad affair. And again, I felt I really owed it to not only Sophia and her family, but to Ukrainians to tell the story properly and with the right amount of empathy and support and make it believable, yet also try and add a bit of wit and humour where possible. So there's a lot going on in the story, and it was probably more of a challenge than anything I've written, but I'm really pleased with how it's played out, and I guess so does the publisher, otherwise she wouldn't have signed off on it. She'd have said keep going, which she normally does. So yeah, that book is called 7 Million Sunflowers, and the reference is obviously to the 7 million refugees who've left Ukraine, and the sunflower is their national symbol, and it's the big flower. It's part of Ukrainian life. So it's called 7 Million Sunflowers, and it's coming out in I think February time. So hopefully with that book I'd love to come back with Joe's your blessing and talk about the book, and it is coming back. I'm pleased to know it's coming out in paperback and not in hardback, because normally there's a big time lag, because the books normally come in paperback because they cost a bit more, and all the schools go, oh, we'll wait till the paperback, which is 6 months later. So but this book is coming straight out in paperback, so so hopefully I'll be getting to talk about that in the coming months. So that's a whistle-stop sort of tour of the 3.5 books, 4 books, the 4th book on its way. Has anyone got any questions about either writing or books in general or anything really. Yeah, sure.
Well, it's kind of like your process of like writing a book. Like, what do you come? So you come up with like the problem first, and then how does like the plot and the characters?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I guess it's different for each book. I guess like with Me Mum, Me Dad and Me, I sort of had it all in one. I obviously didn't have the whole story, but I had it worked out in my mind that there was going to be this boy facing a big problem. He's going to try and find his dad, and there's going to be a resolution. I think with the dyslexia one, it was a bit of a slow burn. I don't like to stick to any rules, and I've read about a few other authors and how they work. In fact, there's one author, you probably haven't read any of his books, but I bet your parents will have done, called Stephen King, who's a thriller horror writer.
Have you finished?
Yeah.
Finished it? Annabelle's just read Carrie. So
Oh, brilliant! And he's a fantastic writer. And this is, I think, one of the best books I've ever read for anyone who's called Stephen King on Writing. And I recommend it to anyone, even if you haven't read his books. I recommend it because the first half of his book is how he got to be a writer, and the second half of the book is his writing tips. And Stephen King says he comes up with a premise for a story, I guess a bit like with Carrie, the girl with the sort of the powers. And then he just starts writing. He says he has no idea how it's going to end. And I imagine a lot of authors go, Mike, I couldn't believe that. But he goes, I started with a central premise, and I want to surprise myself. And I like to do that a bit when I'm writing. That I usually work out more or less how the book is going to end. But with 7 Million Sunflowers, I hadn't worked out exactly, but I knew there would be an ending, and I knew hopefully there'd be a good ending. And I think sometimes that can be quite a good process because you're going through the story with your character. So I guess to give you an answer, no, I don't have a set form of rules, but maybe I should have. I know some writers are very strict about they plot everything and they cover the whole wall and post-it notes. And I guess if you're writing like a crime thriller or something, I suppose you have to do that where a bit like when you watch crime series and they cover the wall with pictures of people. And but I guess my books aren't quite like that. They have an issue and a problem, but I don't have so many characters. I guess some books have so many characters you almost have to have a big board with post-it notes on and everything to try and figure out who are these characters and how do they line up and where do they all fit in. But I do recommend this book to anyone. Any more questions on writing or reading?
Have you got any other sort of, so Stephen King clearly was an influence, have you got any other authors that have been a sort of influence on your writing?
Yeah, I mean, I love the books of Matt Haig. I don't know if any of you, who's both a young adult writer and an adult writer, in the Midnight Library. And I just love his style of writing. It's very fresh, it's very bright, it's very snappy. I just think he's just a fantastic writer. I love Sarah Crossan's books. I mean, I just think they're brilliant. They're sort of unlike anything else. They're very, very surprising in so many ways, but so beautifully written. I just dip in and out of books all the time. I try not to just stick with one author. I read Happy Head. Some of you may have read that. Because it's out there and it's current, and I'm not saying I would write that sort of book, but it's sometimes good to know what other writers are doing, because I think I always learn something. Every book I read, I will pick something up from it. Not that I will copy it, but I will learn something and go, that's a really interesting way of doing stuff, or why don't I do that? Like in Read Between the Lies, and I've seen it done before, not all the time, but each chapter is written from the different character's viewpoint. So the story is consecutive, but each character writes a different chapter. And I think I'd seen somebody do something similar. I thought, that's quite an interesting technique, so I will do that. And I think you become a bit like a magpie, really. You sort of look at all these books and you pick up little bits and pieces and try and find the best bits and just try and become a better writer, really. And books spur you on, because sometimes you read books and go, oh, that's just so brilliant. I read The Miniaturist a while ago, and it's just so beautifully written. I could never write that book, but I wish I had. It's because it's so beautifully written, and I try when I do my rewriting. Is this as good as it can be? Is a better phrase? And when I do my creative writing class, I always say avoid the obvious, and I think that's something that I try to do in all my books. If I'm telling a story, don't tell it in the obvious way, and if you're writing something descriptive, don't write the obvious thing, write the not so obvious, and come at it from a different angle. And I think that's a pressure I put on myself whenever I'm writing, is to I guess beat myself up a bit and say, do better. And that's what good books do. You go, yeah, I need to up my game. Yeah.
Do you ever wish that you'd started writing professionally earlier in your life instead of going into advertising?
Yeah, in some ways I do. I think I probably do. But having said that, advertising did pay very well, and I had a lot of fun doing it. So I've tried not to live a life of regrets, but in some ways I wish I'd started a bit early, and knowing what I know now, I think I probably do wish I'd started a bit sooner. But I suppose I had a family at the time, and I needed the money coming in, and writing doesn't always pay. Like a lot of creative. If you looked at music. For every Ed Sheeran, there's 20,000 others who are earning nothing or next to nothing, and then I guess writing's similar-ish. For every, I guess David Williams, let's say, or J.K. Rowling, or whoever, there are thousands of others who need to work, to need other jobs, and at the time, it's a tricky one. If you can write, because writing you can feel like a selfish thing in a way. You've got to lock yourself away, you've got to spend a lot of time, you aren't necessarily guaranteed you're going to earn very much money, and I guess if you've got family and kids and a mortgage, those things play out as well. But in a way though, yes, I wish I did. Wish I had, to answer your question. I wish I had. Yeah.
If you could just give one piece of advice to someone who wants to have a go at being an author, get an agent and all the rest of it, what would it be? Just one.
Well, I would say, I know it's probably a very obvious answer, is right. It is really, don't think about it, do it. You goes back to what I said right at the beginning. You've got to have that need. You almost got to need to do it. The way some people need to do sport and need to do this, or need to go on their mobile phones, which I'd rather my kids didn't. But really, just do it. And play around with words. Sometimes I'll just sit down and just write a few words, or just have fun with it. And it's all that mental gymnastics, and just see where it takes you. I just say, have fun with it. There are lots of books on how to write, and if anyone wants to do creative writing thing, I'm happy to help out with that. But I think find the joy in it, because I think it is going to be hard work, like anything. But then sometimes you can have both. For people sometimes into sport, it can be both hard work and fun at the same time. And I think you've got to find the fun in it. And I think if you don't, you probably shouldn't carry on. But if you enjoy that process of writing and rewriting and trying to make it better and trying to find new angles and trying to come at it from a new way, then keep going, and who knows where you may end up. You may end up as an author, you may end up as a journalist, you may end up in some other career as a copywriter, but just write, just do it, yeah.
Malcolm, can I ask one last question? Which ad do you wish you had written?
Oh, blimey, which ad? Oh my goodness, that's a tricky one.
Your former life.
Oh God. Yeah, there was a brilliant ad for I don't know if you can remember it, for Nike for the World Cup. And it was using a famous track by Golden Earring, I think it was. Yeah, and it was one of those ads that just captured the fun and the intensity of the sport in such an refreshing way. And it had everything from Homer Simpson in it, it had Ronaldo, there was comedy, they had sports people. I mean, they had a huge budget. In fact, I know some of the people who worked on it. Roger Federer was in it. It was a massive budget, but it just captured the energy and the fun, in about 90 seconds that like nothing else can. So, and I love football as well. So yeah, I wish I'd done that one. Yeah.
I think that's quite interesting because Nike, have you seen the film with Ben Affleck about Nike?
Oh no, I haven't seen that. No.
It's really worth it because it.
Oh, sorry, I have seen it. Yeah, about the shoes. Yeah.
About the
Oh, yeah,
shoes.
of course. Yeah.
And of course, and actually, the creativity.
Yeah.
Why are you out here in the middle of nowhere? Because it's a nice place. Because I run.
Yeah.
It just seemed to me that, I mean, I'm not a runner and I don't buy
Yeah.
You know, if I need trainers, I don't go out and buy Nike ones, but
Yeah.
but I just found it absolutely fascinating how
Yeah.
creative
Yeah.
that they could be.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't a company I knew
Yeah.
about. Obviously,
Yeah.
wonderful trainers.
Yeah.
But Google, I know of, is sort of much more creative. But
Yeah.
clearly they are as well.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
that West Coast sort of
Oh yeah,
mentality.
Nike have always been at the forefront of creativity. Some of their old ads are
Interesting,
fantastic.
yeah.
They've always been,
Yeah.
I guess, because they weren't so big. You know, they weren't as big as Adidas or some of the other brands.
Yeah.
That they had to try harder.
Yeah.
And some of the Nike ads are fantastic.
But the film is the same, isn't it? It's
Yeah,
very
yeah.
creative. It's
Yeah.
very quirky.
No, it's a good film.
Um,
Yeah, for anyone who
Yeah.
wants to see it. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Good.
Okay. Anybody else? Thank you, Malcolm.
Thank
Great. No, thank
so
you. Thank you.
much.
Yeah. Yeah. Pleasure. Pleasure.